The Colorado mountain air was crisp and thin at 8,000 feet elevation, and I could feel my lungs working harder as I stepped out of the rental car at the Pine Ridge Corporate Retreat Center. It was early September, and the aspen trees were just beginning to show hints of gold against the dark evergreen backdrop. This annual company retreat was supposed to be about team building and strategic planning, but for me, it felt more like walking into a lion's den. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a 32-year-old strategic planning analyst at North Point Consulting, a mid-size firm specializing in corporate restructuring and business optimization. I'd been with the company for 4 years, steadily building my reputation as someone who could see patterns others missed, who could identify inefficiencies and propose solutions that actually worked. But there was one person who never seemed to notice my contributions, never missed an opportunity to undermine my confidence, and unfortunately, he was family. Bradley Harrison, my brother-in-law, married to my sister Emma, was North Point's Director of Client Relations. At 38, he was everything I wasn't. Tall, charismatic, with the kind of effortless confidence that made clients trust him immediately. He had an MBA from Northwestern, a corner office on the 42nd floor of our Chicago headquarters, and a salary that was nearly triple mine. More importantly, he had the ear of Richard Blackwood, our CEO and founder. Richard was a legend in the corporate consulting world, someone who'd built North Point from a 2-person startup into a $50 million company over the past 15 years. His approval could make careers, and his disapproval could end them. The retreat was Richard's idea, 3 days in the Colorado mountains, where the entire senior staff could disconnect from daily operations and focus on big-picture strategic thinking. 43 people from various departments, all staying in rustic but comfortable cabins, attending workshops during the day and networking around campfires at night. "Jake!" Emma's voice cut through the mountain air as she approached with Bradley in tow. My sister looked radiant in her hiking boots and designer outdoor gear, every inch the successful executive's wife. "I'm so glad you could make it to the retreat. Bradley's been looking forward to spending time with you." Bradley extended his hand with that practiced smile that had charmed countless clients. "Jake, good to see you, buddy. Ready for 3 days of corporate bonding and trust falls?" His tone was friendly enough, but I caught the subtle condescension. Bradley had a talent for making everything sound like a joke, especially when it came to my work. "Looking forward to it," I replied, matching his handshake and trying to project more confidence than I felt. The first day consisted of standard team-building exercises and departmental presentations. I sat through sessions on leveraging synergies for maximum impact and innovative approaches to client retention, taking notes and trying to identify opportunities to contribute meaningfully to the discussions. But it was during the evening networking session that things took an interesting turn. Richard Blackwood was holding court near the main lodge's stone fireplace, surrounded by senior managers discussing industry trends and competitive challenges. I'd been nursing a beer and listening from the periphery when Richard suddenly turned to address the broader group. "I want to hear from everyone during this retreat," Richard announced, his voice carrying easily across the rustic room. "We're facing some significant challenges in the coming year, and I believe our best solutions will come from fresh perspectives, not just from the same voices we always hear." This was my opening. For months, I'd been developing a comprehensive analysis of our company's operational inefficiencies, identifying patterns in client satisfaction data that suggested fundamental problems with our service delivery model. It was the kind of strategic thinking that could reshape how we approached client relationships. "Richard," I said, standing up and feeling every eye in the room turn toward me, "I've been working on something that might be relevant to that discussion." Bradley's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but I caught it, a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was already calculating how to manage whatever I was about to say. "Excellent, Jake. What's on your mind?" I've been analyzing our client satisfaction data over the past 3 years, and I've identified some patterns that suggest we might be approaching client relationships from the wrong angle entirely. The room was quiet now, everyone listening intently. This was the kind of moment that could define a career, either launching it to the next level or ending it in spectacular failure. Our current model focuses heavily on initial client acquisition and project delivery, but we're missing critical opportunities for long-term relationship building that could dramatically increase both client retention and project profitability. I pulled out my phone and opened the presentation I'd been refining for weeks. Would it be possible to connect to the lodge's presentation system? I have some data that illustrates the opportunity. Richard nodded approvingly. Absolutely. Let's see what you've discovered. As I connected my phone to the lodge's smart TV, I could feel the tension in the room shift. This wasn't a casual conversation anymore. This was an impromptu presentation to the entire senior leadership team. The first slide appeared on screen, Rethinking Client Relationships, a data-driven approach to sustainable growth. I walked through my analysis methodically, showing how our current client satisfaction scores correlated with specific aspects of our service delivery, how certain types of client interactions led to contract renewals, while others resulted in clients switching to competitors. The key insight, I explained, advancing to a slide showing projected revenue impacts, is that clients don't just want solutions to their immediate problems. They want partnerships that help them anticipate and prepare for future challenges. The presentation continued for 20 minutes, with me outlining a comprehensive strategy for restructuring our client relationship model. I proposed changes to how we staffed projects, how we measured success, and how we maintained ongoing relationships with clients after project completion. The room was completely silent when I finished, everyone processing what they'd heard. Richard was leaning forward in his chair, his expression intense and focused. "Jake, this is fascinating work," Richard said finally. "The data analysis is sophisticated, and the strategic implications are significant. How long have you been developing this?" "About 6 months, sir. I've been working on it during evenings and weekends, using client feedback data and project outcome metrics to identify the patterns." "Impressive initiative," Richard nodded. "This kind of thinking is exactly what we need to stay competitive." But then Bradley stood up, and I could see the familiar expression that meant he was about to say something that would undermine everything I'd just accomplished. "It's an interesting academic exercise, Jake," Bradley said, with that patronizing tone I'd learned to dread. "But I think you might be overcomplicating things. Client relationships are really about personal connections and trust, not data points and spreadsheets." The room's energy shifted again, and I felt that familiar sinking sensation as Bradley continued. "I mean, I appreciate the effort you put into this analysis, but in my experience, clients want results, not theories about relationship optimization. We're consultants, not relationship counselors." Several people chuckled, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. Bradley had just dismissed 6 months of careful research and strategic thinking as academic exercise and theories. "Bradley makes a good point," one of the other directors added. "We need to be careful not to overthink simple business relationships." I wanted to argue, to defend my work, to explain that the data clearly supported my conclusions, but I could see that the moment had passed. Bradley had successfully reframed my presentation as naive theoretical work rather than practical strategic insight. Richard was looking between Bradley and me, clearly processing the disagreement. "Well, it's certainly given us something to think about," he said diplomatically. "Jake, I'd like you to send me your complete analysis. I want to review it more thoroughly." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I spent the rest of the evening replaying Bradley's dismissal, feeling humiliated and frustrated. Once again, my brother-in-law had managed to undermine my credibility while maintaining his own image as the practical, experienced professional. As the evening wound down and people began heading back to their cabins, Bradley approached me with that same false friendly smile. Hey, Jake. No hard feelings about earlier, right? I just think it's important to keep things practical and focused on what actually works in the real world. Sure, Bradley, no hard feelings. But as I walked back to my cabin under the star-filled Colorado sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Richard's request to see my complete analysis suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Bradley's dismissal. Maybe this wasn't over yet. The second day of the retreat dawned grey and overcast, with thick clouds clinging to the mountain peaks like cotton batting. I'd barely slept, replaying Bradley's dismissal of my presentation and wondering if I'd just torpedoed my career by speaking up in front of the entire leadership team. The morning session was focused on innovative problem-solving techniques, led by an external facilitator who had us breaking into small groups to tackle hypothetical business challenges. I found myself grouped with Jennifer Martinez from marketing, Tom Chen from operations, and unfortunately Bradley. "All right, team," Bradley said, automatically assuming leadership of our group. "Let's show everyone how real professionals handle strategic challenges." The facilitator presented our scenario, a mid-sized manufacturing company facing declining margins and increased competition from overseas producers. We had 45 minutes to develop a comprehensive turnaround strategy. I started sketching out an analysis framework, identifying the key factors that typically drove margin compression in manufacturing. But before I could get far, Bradley interrupted. "Jake, we don't need to overcomplicate this. The solution is obvious. They need to improve their marketing and sales processes, more aggressive pricing, better client relationships, maybe some strategic partnerships." Jennifer looked between us uncertainly. "Actually, Jake's framework looks pretty thorough. Maybe we should consider all the factors before jumping to solutions." "Trust me," Bradley said with that confident smile. "I've handled dozens of manufacturing clients. The problem is always the same. They're not selling effectively." Tom Chen, who'd been quietly reviewing the case study details, spoke up. "But the data shows they're already pricing competitively and have strong market share. The margin compression seems to be coming from operational inefficiencies." Bradley waved dismissively. "Operational issues are just symptoms. The real problem is always revenue-focused." I bit my tongue and continued working on my analysis, identifying specific cost drivers and efficiency opportunities that could address the margin compression without sacrificing market position. But every time I tried to contribute to the group discussion, Bradley redirected the conversation back to his sales-focused approach. When our group presented to the larger session, Bradley took the lead, outlining a strategy that focused entirely on revenue enhancement while ignoring the operational issues that Tom and I had identified. The facilitator nodded politely, but asked several pointed questions about cost structure and operational efficiency, questions that Bradley deflected with generalities about the importance of client-focused solutions. During the lunch break, I found myself sitting alone on the lodge's wraparound porch, looking out at the mountains and trying to process my frustration. This was the pattern that had defined my relationship with Bradley for years. He dismissed my insights while positioning himself as the voice of practical experience. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Richard Blackwood approaching with a cup of coffee and a thoughtful expression. "Of course, sir. Please, sit down." Richard settled into the adjacent chair and was quiet for a moment, seemingly content to enjoy the mountain view. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about your presentation last night, the client relationship analysis you showed." My heart rate accelerated. "Yes, sir. I want you to know that I've been observing some of the same patterns you identified. Client retention has been a growing concern, and our project profitability has been declining despite strong initial sales. This was not what I'd expected. I'm glad the analysis resonated with you, Richard. More than resonated, I think you've identified something fundamental about how we need to evolve our business model." Richard turned to look at me directly. "How confident are you in your conclusions?" Very confident, sir. The data is clear, and the patterns are consistent across all our major client segments. Richard nodded slowly. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you believe your analysis represents a genuine strategic opportunity, or is it primarily theoretical? The question hung in the air between us. This was my chance to either defend my work or cave to the pressure of Bradley's dismissal. Richard, I believe this analysis represents the most significant strategic opportunity our company has right now. The revenue impact alone could increase our annual profitability by 25–30%, and the competitive advantages would be sustainable long-term. Even though your brother-in-law disagrees. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Richard was clearly aware of the family dynamics at play. Bradley's perspective is based on his experience with traditional sales approaches, which have been successful for our company. But the market is changing, and our clients' needs are evolving. What worked 5 years ago might not work going forward. Richard was quiet for another long moment. Jake, I'm going to share something with you in confidence. I've been working with an external consulting firm for the past 6 months, paying them $75,000 to analyze our client retention and profitability challenges. My stomach dropped. If Richard was already working with external consultants, my presentation might have been completely redundant. Their preliminary findings, Richard continued, are remarkably similar to what you presented last night. But they've been working on this for 6 months with a team of 5 people, and you developed this analysis independently during your spare time. I didn't know how to respond to that. Which raises an interesting question, Richard said, standing up and preparing to head back inside. Why is one of my junior analysts identifying strategic opportunities that my senior directors are missing? He paused at the door. I want you to present your complete analysis to the full leadership team tomorrow morning. 30 minutes, comprehensive overview, specific recommendations. Can you do that? Absolutely, sir. Good. And Jake, don't worry about making anyone uncomfortable with your conclusions. I want to hear your honest assessment of where we need to go as a company. As Richard disappeared back into the lodge, I sat alone on the porch, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 10 minutes, my entire professional situation had shifted dramatically. Tomorrow morning, I would have the opportunity to present my strategic analysis to the entire leadership team, with Richard's explicit support. But I also knew that Bradley wouldn't take this development quietly. He'd see it as a direct challenge to his authority and expertise, and he'd do everything possible to undermine my presentation. The afternoon sessions passed in a blur of team-building exercises and strategic planning workshops. I could feel Bradley watching me, clearly sensing that something had changed, but not knowing exactly what. During the dinner break, he approached me with a forced casualness that didn't quite hide his concern. How's the retreat going for you, Jake? Getting a lot out of the sessions? It's been very educational, I replied carefully. I hope you're not taking my feedback from last night personally. I just think it's important to keep things practical and focused on proven strategies. I understand your perspective, Bradley. He studied my expression, clearly trying to read between the lines. You know, Emma mentioned that you've been working a lot of late nights recently. I hope you're not burning yourself out with unnecessary projects. The implicit warning was clear. Bradley was reminding me of the family connections at stake, suggesting that my professional ambitions might have personal consequences. I appreciate the concern, I said evenly, but I'm just trying to contribute to the company's success in whatever way I can. Bradley nodded, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He knew something was happening, and he was already preparing his response. That evening, I worked until 2 a.m. in my cabin, refining my presentation and preparing for what I knew would be the most important 30 minutes of my career. The mountain silence was broken only by the distant sound of wind through the pines and the occasional call of a night bird. As I finally closed my laptop and prepared for bed, I realized that tomorrow would determine not just my professional future, but also the dynamics of my family relationships. Bradley had made it clear that opposing him professionally would have personal consequences. But Richard had given me an opportunity to present my vision for the company's future, and I wasn't going to waste it. The final morning of the retreat arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of mountain dawn where every peak stood out in sharp relief against the impossibly blue sky. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., running through my presentation one final time, checking every slide, every data point, every recommendation. The main conference room at Pine Ridge had been transformed for the morning session. Tables arranged in a U-shape, the large screen positioned where everyone could see clearly, and Richard sitting at the head of the room with an expression that gave nothing away about what he was thinking. All 43 retreat participants were present, including the complete senior leadership team. Bradley sat in the front row, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. Emma had chosen a seat near the back, probably sensing the undercurrent of tension between her husband and brother. "Good morning, everyone," Richard began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Before we conclude our retreat, I want to share something that I believe could be transformative for our company's future." The room fell silent, everyone recognizing the serious tone in Richard's voice. "Yesterday, one of our team members presented an analysis that I believe deserves our full attention. Jake Morrison has been conducting independent research into our client relationship patterns, and his findings align remarkably with some external consulting work we've been conducting." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, and I could see Bradley's expression shift from relaxed confidence to something approaching concern. "Jake, would you please present your analysis to the team?" I stood up, my heart hammering but my mind clear. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, not just over the past few days, but for years of careful observation and strategic thinking. "Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone." I connected my laptop to the presentation system and watched as my opening slide appeared on the screen. Transforming Client Relationships, a strategic framework for sustainable growth. Over the past 6 months, I've been analyzing our client satisfaction data, project outcomes, and retention patterns to understand why some client relationships thrive while others struggle. I advanced to the next slide, showing a comprehensive data visualization of client satisfaction scores correlated with various service delivery metrics. What I discovered is that our current business model is optimized for initial client acquisition and project delivery, but it's missing critical opportunities for long-term relationship building that could dramatically increase both retention and profitability. The room was completely focused now, everyone studying the data on screen. The key insight is that clients don't just want solutions to their immediate problems. They want partnerships that help them anticipate and prepare for future challenges. I walked through the analysis methodically, showing how certain types of client interactions led to contract renewals, while others resulted in clients switching to competitors. The data was compelling, showing clear patterns that had been hiding in plain sight. Our most successful client relationships share 3 characteristics, I continued, advancing to a slide that outlined the key factors. First, ongoing strategic consultation beyond project completion. Second, proactive identification of emerging challenges. Third, collaborative problem-solving rather than prescriptive solutions. Bradley shifted in his seat, and I could see him preparing to interrupt, but Richard caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of his head, signaling him to wait. Based on this analysis, I'm proposing a fundamental restructuring of how we approach client relationships, I said, moving to the recommendation section of my presentation. I outlined a comprehensive strategy for transforming Northpoint from a project-based consulting firm into a true strategic partnership organization. The changes would affect everything from how we staffed engagements to how we measured success. The financial impact would be significant, I explained, showing projected revenue increases. Based on our current client base, implementing this strategy could increase annual revenue by 28% within 2 years, while improving client satisfaction scores by an average of 35%. The room was buzzing with quiet conversations as people processed the implications of what I was presenting. But the most important benefit isn't financial, I continued. This approach would create sustainable competitive advantages that would be difficult for competitors to replicate because it's based on deep, long-term relationships rather than transactional project delivery. I concluded with a detailed implementation timeline and resource requirements, showing how the transformation could be accomplished over 18 months without disrupting existing client commitments. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. The room erupted in discussion. Senior managers were leaning forward, asking detailed questions about data sources, implementation challenges, and competitive implications. The energy was electric, with everyone recognizing that they were seeing something potentially transformative. But then Bradley stood up, and the room gradually quieted. "Jake, I want to commend you for the effort you've put into this analysis," he began, his tone measured, but carrying an undertone of condescension. "It's clear you've spent considerable time on this theoretical framework." Here it comes, I thought, the dismissal, the reframing, the subtle undermining that would make my presentation seem naive and impractical. However, I think we need to be very careful about overcomplicating our business model based on data analysis that might not reflect the real-world complexities of client relationships. Bradley moved to the front of the room, positioning himself as the voice of practical experience. In my 12 years of client relationship management, I've learned that successful consulting is really about trust, personal connections, and delivering results. Clients don't want elaborate partnership frameworks. They want their problems solved efficiently and effectively. I could see some people in the room nodding, responding to Bradley's confident delivery and appeal to practical experience. While Jake's data analysis is interesting, I'm concerned that implementing these recommendations could actually damage our client relationships by making them more complicated and less focused on results. Bradley continued for several more minutes, systematically dismantling my presentation by positioning it as academic theory versus practical business reality. He was skilled at this, making his criticism sound reasonable and measured, while effectively discrediting everything I'd presented. The room's energy was shifting, with people beginning to question whether my analysis was as compelling as it had initially seemed. So, while I appreciate Jake's enthusiasm and analytical work, Bradley concluded, I believe we should stick with the client relationship approaches that have made our company successful, rather than experimenting with unproven strategies that could put our client base at risk. He sat down with that same confident smile, clearly believing he'd successfully neutralized my presentation. The room was quiet, everyone processing the disagreement between Bradley's practical experience and my data-driven recommendations. I could see Richard evaluating the situation, weighing the competing perspectives. Then Richard stood up, and something in his posture made everyone pay attention. "I appreciate your perspective on client relationships," Richard said, his voice carrying a weight that made it clear something significant was about to happen. "But I need to share something with the team that puts Jake's analysis in a different context." The room was completely silent now, everyone sensing that whatever Richard was about to say would be important. "For the past 6 months, I've been working with McKinsey & Company to analyze our client retention and profitability challenges. We've paid them $75,000 for this analysis." Bradley's expression began to change as he realized where this was heading. "Their findings, which I received 2 weeks ago, are remarkably similar to what Jake just presented. In fact, Jake's analysis is more comprehensive in several key areas." Richard moved to the front of the room, his presence commanding everyone's attention. But here's what's really remarkable. Jake developed this analysis independently, during his own time, using only internal data sources. He identified the same strategic opportunities that a team of 5 McKinsey consultants found after 6 months of work. The room was electric with tension as everyone processed this revelation. So when Bradley suggests that Jake's recommendations are theoretical and impractical, he's actually criticizing the same strategic framework that McKinsey, the most prestigious consulting firm in the world, has recommended to us. Bradley looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The confident smile had vanished, replaced by a look of shock and growing realization. In fact, Richard continued, I've decided to implement Jake's recommendations as our core strategic initiative for the next 2 years. He turned to look directly at me. Jake, I'm promoting you to Director of Strategic Client Development, effective immediately. You'll be leading the implementation of this new client relationship framework with full authority to restructure how we approach client partnerships. The room erupted in congratulations and applause, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat. In the span of 5 minutes, my entire career had been transformed. But as I looked at Bradley's stunned expression, I realized that while I'd won professionally, the family dynamics were about to become very complicated. The drive back to Chicago felt surreal. I was following the same mountain highways I'd traveled just 3 days earlier, but everything had changed. The promotion, the validation, the complete reversal of my professional status, it all felt like something that had happened to someone else. My phone had been buzzing constantly since the presentation ended. Congratulations from colleagues, meeting requests from senior managers, and several missed calls from Emma. I turned off the phone after the 5th call, needing time to process what had just happened. The retreat had concluded with a celebration dinner, where I found myself seated at Richard's table, discussing implementation timelines and resource allocation as if I'd been a senior director for years rather than hours. Bradley had left early, claiming he needed to handle some urgent client issues back in Chicago. Emma had approached me as people were heading back to their cabins for the final night. Jake, we need to talk, she'd said, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. Emma, I know this is complicated. Bradley's really upset. He feels like you blindsided him, made him look bad in front of the entire leadership team. I didn't set out to make anyone look bad. I just presented my analysis. But you knew he'd disagree with it. You knew it would put him in a difficult position. I'd looked at my sister, this person who'd supported me through everything growing up and felt the weight of divided loyalties. Emma, Bradley's been undermining my work for years. Every time I try to contribute something meaningful, he dismisses it as theoretical or impractical. What was I supposed to do? Keep quiet forever to avoid making him uncomfortable? She'd been quiet for a long moment. I just don't want this to damage our family. Neither do I. But I can't sacrifice my career to protect Bradley's ego. Now, driving through the Colorado plains, as the mountains receded in my rearview mirror, I was replaying that conversation and wondering what I'd find when I returned to the office on Monday. The Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon just as the sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and orange. I'd made this drive dozens of times, but tonight it felt like I was seeing the city for the first time, not as the place where I struggled to get noticed, but as the place where I'd built something significant. Monday morning arrived with the kind of energy that comes from knowing your entire professional life has shifted overnight. I arrived at the office early, wanting to prepare for what I knew would be a challenging day of managing new responsibilities while navigating the aftermath of the retreat. Jennifer Martinez was waiting by my desk with coffee and a huge smile. "Director Morrison," she said with mock formality, "how does it feel to be the youngest director in company history?" "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure," I admitted. "The whole office is buzzing about what happened at the retreat. Bradley's been in his office with the door closed since 7 a.m., and Richard wants to see you at 9 a.m. to discuss your transition plan." The morning flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, congratulations, and logistical discussions about my new role. Richard had already begun restructuring the organizational chart, moving me from the strategic planning department to a newly created client development division that would report directly to him. "Jake, I want you to understand the significance of what you've accomplished," Richard said during our private meeting. "In 15 years of building this company, I've never seen someone identify strategic opportunities with this level of sophistication and independence." "Thank you, Richard. I'm committed to making this transformation successful." "I know you are, but I also want you to be prepared for some resistance. Change is always difficult, especially when it challenges established ways of doing things." He didn't need to mention Bradley by name. We both knew who he was talking about. "I've been thinking about the implementation strategy," I said, pulling out the detailed plan I'd been refining since the retreat. "I believe we can minimize disruption by piloting the new approach with a small group of clients before rolling it out company-wide." Richard reviewed my proposal, nodding approvingly at the careful planning and risk mitigation strategies I'd outlined. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that convinced me you were ready for this role. Start with the pilot program immediately." The rest of the week passed in a blur of activity. I was setting up my new office, hiring additional staff for the client development division, and beginning outreach to potential pilot program participants. The response from clients was overwhelmingly positive. They were excited about the prospect of deeper strategic partnerships rather than transactional project relationships. But Bradley's reaction was a different story entirely. He'd been avoiding me since our return from Colorado, communicating only through terse emails and declining meeting invitations. The few times we'd encountered each other in hallways or elevators, he'd been coldly professional, offering perfunctory greetings before finding excuses to end the conversation quickly. The confrontation I'd been expecting finally came on Friday afternoon. "Jake, we need to talk." I looked up from my desk to find Bradley standing in my office doorway, his expression grim and determined. "Of course, Bradley. Come in. Close the door." He sat down across from my desk, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I want you to know that I don't appreciate what you did at the retreat." "What exactly did I do, Bradley?" "You blindsided me. You presented analysis that you knew would contradict my perspective, and you did it in front of the entire leadership team without giving me any warning." I studied his face, seeing genuine anger beneath the professional composure. "Bradley, I presented strategic analysis that I believed would benefit the company. The fact that it contradicted your approach wasn't my primary concern, but it made me look incompetent. Like I don't understand client relationships after 12 years of managing them successfully. No one said you were incompetent, but maybe your approach isn't the only valid one." Bradley's composure cracked slightly. "You think you're so smart with your data analysis and strategic frameworks, but you don't understand the real world of client relationships. You don't understand the complexity of maintaining trust and delivering results under pressure." Actually, I think my analysis demonstrates exactly that understanding, but through a different lens. Your analysis is theoretical bullshit, Jake, and the fact that Richard bought into it doesn't make it less bullshit. The mask was completely off now, and I was seeing the real Bradley, not the polished professional, but someone whose authority had been threatened and who was lashing out in response. "You know what the real problem is?" Bradley continued. "You've always resented my success. You've always felt like you deserved more recognition, more responsibility. So you found a way to undermine me while making yourself look good. Bradley, this was never about you. This was about identifying opportunities to improve our business. Don't bullshit me, Jake. You planned this whole thing. You developed your analysis knowing it would contradict my approach, and you waited for the perfect moment to present it in front of Richard. He was partially right, but not in the way he thought. I had been looking for an opportunity to present my strategic thinking, but I hadn't set out to undermine him personally. Bradley, I'm sorry that you feel threatened by my promotion, but I'm not going to apologize for doing good work or for being recognized for it. Threatened? Bradley's voice rose. I'm not threatened by you, Jake. I'm disappointed. I thought we were family, but you've shown that you're willing to damage family relationships to advance your career. That stung, because there was some truth to it. I had known that my presentation would put Bradley in a difficult position, and I'd done it anyway. You're right that family relationships matter, I said carefully. But you can't expect me to limit my professional growth to protect your position. Bradley stood up, his anger now fully visible. This isn't over, Jake. You may have won this round, but I've been in this business a lot longer than you. I know how to survive and thrive in corporate environments. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Enjoy your promotion while it lasts. He left my office, closing the door with enough force to rattle the frame. As I sat alone in my new office, looking out at the Chicago skyline, I reflected on the strange turns that life can take. A week ago, I'd been a junior analyst, struggling to get my ideas heard. Now, I was a director with authority to reshape how our company approached client relationships. But the victory felt complicated. I'd achieved everything I'd wanted professionally, but at the cost of seriously damaging my relationship with Bradley and potentially creating lasting family tensions. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Can we have dinner this weekend? We need to talk about everything that's happened. I typed back, of course, I want to work through this too. The truth was, I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Recognition for my strategic thinking, authority to implement my vision, and a career trajectory that exceeded my wildest expectations. But as I'd learned over the past week, sometimes getting what you want means accepting consequences you didn't fully anticipate. The view from the 35th floor was spectacular, but it came with a price. The question now was whether that price was worth paying. Looking back, I realized that Bradley's dismissal of my work at the retreat had been the catalyst for everything that followed. If he'd simply acknowledged the validity of my analysis instead of trying to undermine it, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead. And sometimes the person who tries to diminish your accomplishments ends up being the reason those accomplishments get noticed by the people who matter most. The mountain air in Colorado had been thin, but it had helped me see clearly for the first time in years. Now, I had to figure out how to breathe in this new atmosphere of success and family complexity. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Richard. Jake, I just got off the phone with our first pilot program client. They're thrilled with the new partnership approach and want to expand the scope of our engagement. Congratulations, you're already proving that your strategy works. As I hung up the phone, I realized that whatever personal complications lay ahead, professionally, I was exactly where I belonged. The retreat had ended, but the real journey was just beginning.